If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Flying. I've always said, well, actually, I don't know. I've said flying, but then now that I'm a candidate and our district is huge, I'm more interested in teleporting because I think it's faster. My name is Jessica Cisneros. I'm an immigration and human rights attorney running for Congress in Texas' 28th Congressional District. I'm running because I truly believe that South Texas deserves a representative who's going to fight for our dreams as hard as we do. Someone who's going to be transparent, someone who's going to be serving the best interests of our district and make sure that we have the investment and the resources that we need to thrive.
What has your experience and that of family and friends been like with the current U.S. healthcare system? Has it served you and your family well?
No, it hasn't. Quite the opposite, actually. One of the big reasons why I am a huge proponent for a single-payer healthcare system like Medicare for All is because it's a story based on loss. It's a story that unfortunately is so common for people here in South Texas. I lost one of my aunts when I was 13 years old to stomach cancer that metastasized, and she couldn't afford the healthcare treatment. She couldn't afford the chemotherapy, and she ended up going to the hospital or getting diagnosed pretty late. It was already stage 4. It was already metastasizing, and it was because she just couldn't afford to go to the doctor, even though she felt ill. And I remember being 13 years old, and what we do here in South Texas to try to fundraise for medical expenses is sell plates of food on the side of the highway. We sell tickets for what we call steak plate sales. And the role for us as young, as kids trying to fundraise is you're on the side of the street waving a sign, trying to flag down cars to come and buy some of your food so that you can fundraise. I remember those memories very vividly. And I also remember that after she passed away, there we were again, having to fundraise to try to pay for her funeral expenses. And when we talk about why we need Medicare for All in this district, I talk about my healthcare story because, as I mentioned, unfortunately, my story is far too common. And for many people here, even stuff like getting a routine dental checkup, people have to travel to Mexico just because it's so much cheaper over there. But then we're also limited along the border based on our immigration status, because there's a lot of us who lived in mixed status families, and those of us who have the privilege to be able to cross into Mexico to get healthcare can do so. But then there's a whole lot of other people who can't. And during the pandemic, I lost one of my cousins because she was undocumented. She died because of cancer. She had breast cancer that metastasized as well. And she was undocumented, so she couldn't go to Mexico. She couldn't get treated here because she needed to go see a specialist in San Antonio, and we have checkpoints along the border, so she wasn't able to leave the area. She left behind 4 children, and now it's up to our family to try to figure out how we're going to care for those 4 children, my cousins. And again, these aren't stories that are unique to me. It's a story that happens again and again and again, and we're tired of it because we know that this is a policy choice, and we're fighting for representation that's actually going to advocate on behalf of South Texans here instead of big pharma or health insurance companies, the way that unfortunately our current representative is doing.
I'm so sorry. Those are terrible experiences.
Thank you. They are, but I think talking about them and talking about how this shouldn't be a normal thing, how it shouldn't be a normalized thing is so important. And I think that we've had such a huge impact over the last cycle and this cycle as well, because I think a lot of people are realizing, especially now that we are almost 3 years into a pandemic, how this is terrible, and that we are one of the richest countries in the world, and we should be investing in our people and their health care and their lives, and we're not doing so. Our first ad that came out this week is based on that story because it resonates so strongly with people here, and the response has been overwhelming in a good way, of course.
Like Ari, I'm really sorry about the pain you and your family have suffered at the hands of this healthcare system. I'm curious, you're going up for elected office because you want to change things. What are the biggest problems in the US healthcare system? And what changes do you think we need to make to address those problems?
We need to recognize that healthcare should be a human right, that healthcare shouldn't be rationed to those who can't afford it, I think is mostly the biggest tenet of the fundamental change that I want to see in our healthcare system. We want to make sure that we are expanding healthcare at every single step, every single opportunity that we can. Obviously, I mean, the end in sight, or the dream goal is to have that single payer healthcare system. But we also need to recognize that there's things already along the way that we need to support, such as, for example, the Build Back Better bill included expansion of healthcare that unfortunately my current representative was trying to water down and obstruct. So for me, like any opportunity that I can have as an elected official that's going to push for expanding healthcare, I'm absolutely going to take it, because I don't want someone else to go through the same thing that I went through when I was growing up and I'm currently going through right now. Because again, I think every single person that dies at the hands of this ineffective and atrocious healthcare system is a policy choice.
So you have articulated a bold vision, but what is your theory of change? How do we build that better healthcare system, and what role do you see for yourself in that theory of change?
I think one of the things that, especially as someone who has ran for Congress last time, had to start this political operation from scratch, because my congressman hadn't gone, seriously challenged in more than a decade. There was a whole group of us, a whole generation of us that didn't know what running for federal office looked like, because we just hadn't seen a race like this in a very long time. Now that we have the experience, now that we really know what we're doing, and I think it's shown this cycle that we're not starting from scratch. From day one, we hit the ground running. That investment in training people here locally as to what it looks like to not just organize politically, but also skills that can translate into issue-based organizing is huge. We're, teaching folks how to, be able to do outreach to voters, to supporters, how to fundraise, how to budget, how to do communication, strategic outreach, all of those things. Folks here already know how to do it, which was something that, again, was really difficult, or a hurdle that was very difficult to overcome our first election, just because that infrastructure wasn't there. But also knowing the help that I had from people along the way, and how possible it was for me, as someone whose parents got started off as farm workers in this country. I don't come from wealth myself, but the reason why it's possible for me to even be competitive with a congressperson who has more than $2 million in the bank and is being bankrolled by people like the Koch brothers and insurance companies and the NRA and big oil and the private prison industry has been because we've nickeled and dimed our way. And it's been like this huge outpour of support of people that, even elected officials, right? Like we recently got endorsed by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, and that was huge for us, because then she's lending that infrastructure that she built and that platform that she has, along with other people that have done the same thing. Something I hope that I'm able to count on you all, if I am able to count on your endorsement, to amplify the message of our campaign. And for me, I think about it in terms of paying it forward, like the impact that we can have in terms of local, state, and even federal offices, this wealth of knowledge that my team and I and volunteers and supporters have built over the past 3 years, and loaning it, right? Being able to provide those resources and knowledge, I think, is huge, especially when we're talking about creating change at both the local and state level. I'm from Texas. I'm sure you all heard about our disastrous laws coming from the Texas legislature, including those on healthcare. You don't need millions of dollars to be competitive in those seats, right? And I think that for us, being able to provide resources to folks that agree with us on expanding healthcare and making sure that we are treating healthcare as a human right and not a privilege, amplifying the message of those people, getting those people elected, that in and out strategy, I think would be huge in terms of creating change for people, not just in South Texas, but I'm thinking, more broadly, the state as a whole and across the country as well.
How do you see healthcare issues as being interconnected with other key policies or key beliefs and ideologies that you have that are driving you to participate in this electoral and governing process?
When we're talking about the biggest issues in the district, it's healthcare, and then it's also talking about diversifying the workforce and making sure that there are good paying union jobs are huge, right? Because those come with benefits as well. And those benefits also include healthcare. So even something as that you might not think it's healthcare related, such as the PRO Act, which would allow people to organize for good paying union jobs. We know that that intersects with healthcare because we know that comes with benefit expansion too. A lot of these are intersectional issues, and I think here along the border, they intersect, in a very different way than they might be in further into the United States, where I talked about immigration and healthcare, right? That one's a huge one. Economics is also huge here in terms of wage justice, people being able to afford the healthcare to begin with. Texas still has a minimum wage of $7.25. So when we talk about how these issues intersect, they do all the time. And we have to talk about it comprehensively as well, because as we know, it's not just you can pigeonhole one issue into one thing. It really is an entire spectrum of policy issues that we're fighting for.
How do you plan to win your race?
That one's an easy one. Hard to execute, but an easy one. I think we saw that our strategy was working last time, right? It's not surprising. Healthcare and good paying jobs are the number one issues for voters in this district. And I say that it's not surprising because the poverty rate in my hometown has been close to 30%. It's really high. The unemployment rate usually tends to be low, but that's because people have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Because as I mentioned, the minimum wage here is still $7.25. Almost 25% of people before the pandemic were uninsured. We think those numbers are even higher now because there were so many people that were laid off over the past 3 years. And we suffered a lot of loss over the past year where people either lost loved ones or lost their jobs or lost a lot of the security that they, the little security that they had prior to the pandemic. We were able to earn 48.2% of the vote in our first race. And I was a 26-year-old first-time candidate that almost nobody in the district had heard of, going up against a very entrenched incumbent, someone that had been in office at that point for 15 years. And even prior to that, he was state representative and then served as Rick Perry's Secretary of State. So he's been representing Laredo in some capacity or the other for longer than I've been alive. Somebody, as I mentioned, who counts with millions of dollars in the bank. And for us to be able to come up with almost 50% of the vote just goes to show that there were so many people that were ready to be able to vote for somebody else, to vote for change. And they decided to trust us because they knew that the status quo wasn't working for them. And here we were presenting, bold policy that meets the moment, that meets the challenges that they're facing. And the messenger, happens to be someone that knows what those struggles are because she's lived them herself. So what we've been focusing on this cycle, knowing that I think it's really validating to be able to point at, the huge success that we had, that it was only 2,700 votes that made the difference, has been continuing to build on what we created last time. I think one of the biggest hurdles that we had was that name ID. Obviously, people aren't going to vote for you if they don't know who you are. So the fact that, almost half of the people last time around voted for us, that gave us a lot. We're not starting from scratch this time around. And then also we know that under redistricting, we actually got a bigger chunk of San Antonio this time around. Last time it only accounted for, our district only had 5% of Bexar County, which is where San Antonio is in. And there we won 2-1. On election day, we won almost 75% of the vote. And it was a key part of our strategy to be competitive last time around. This time, we now cover 25% of Bexar County. And those are our voters. Those are people who, are really upset at Congressman Cuellar for not voting to expand healthcare, not voting with Democrats to try to protect abortion rights, not voting with Democrats to try to expand labor protections and fight for the right to organize. All of those issues are really important to them, and they're issues that we've been talking about since last cycle. So we feel pretty confident that once we introduce ourselves, as we have been over the past several months since we announced, we can win. And I do think that recent news from last week also helps, just because we have been talking about Cuellar, being corrupt in the sense that he's getting a lot of corporate money, or a lot of PAC money from corporate PACs, including, insurance lobbyists. And all the bad guys you can think of, and how that's been having an influence on the votes and the way that he's been voting for the past 18 years at this point. And those votes don't really coincide with the values of this district. So people are definitely paying attention now. And I think that we are in a really good position to finish off what we started last time. But we do have to take advantage of, the current circumstances right now and hammer in that point that when they vote for me, it's a vote for transparency. It's a vote for someone who is not selling out to any corporate lobbyists or corporate PACs, because I'm not taking a single dime from them, that I'm only going to be responsive to the needs of the district. And so far, it's been a really powerful message.
I love your optimism.
Thank you. I think we have to be, because it's pretty bad otherwise.
Who is someone you consider to be a hero in your life, and why?
For me, it's always been my parents, because I think they display our values of hard work and familia, and also that underdog quality that so many people across the district have, and that I think we reflect with this campaign as well, where we always prove that if we are given the resources or the know-how, we can rise up to the challenge. And that's something that my parents have always instilled in me. Like, they always tell me, or I listen to their prayers, to be honest, where they tell God, like, just put me where the resources are, just give me the know-how and I'll take it from there. Like, that's kind of what we're doing with this campaign. Like, put us where the resources are. We'll ask for them. We'll figure it out. We'll nickel and dime our way through. We'll ask around. We'll find that mentorship and we'll figure it out, and we'll take it from there. So I think for me, absolutely, my parents are 100% my rock and have been super supportive throughout this entire process. And I think I was probably the last person to find out that I was going to run for Congress, because my parents always say that. They're like, yeah, we're expecting it. Like, I don't know why this is a surprising thing for you, but I'm just really thankful to have them in my life, and that they've been just incredibly supportive all the way through.
Thank you so much for your work and your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We really appreciate taking time to speak to us today.
Thank you all, and take care. And thank you for the work that you're doing. It's important for us.